Exploration. The Egyptian Campaign. Why did Napoleon go to Egypt? The decision by General Napoleon Bonaparte to embark on the Egyptian campaign in 1798 remains one of the most intriguing and seemingly illogical undertakings of his early career. Just 2 years after his stunning victories transformed a demoralized rabble into the triumphant army of Italy, Napoleon led an armada of hundreds of ships and 35,000 troops not against France's immediate European foes, but into the sands of the Ottoman province of Egypt. On the surface, the campaign appears to be a disastrous military and strategic detour, a costly distraction that ultimately achieved none of its stated goals. Yet a deeper analysis reveals that the expedition was a complex, multi-layered gamble rooted in political expediency, military strategy against Great Britain, and Napoleon's own towering personal ambition and profound classical romanticism. By 1798, Napoleon had achieved a level of public fame and military authority that made him a significant political threat to the very government he served, the deeply corrupt and unstable Directory. Following the Italian campaigns, Napoleon returned to Paris not as a humble general, but as a popular hero, a figure of near-legendary status whose presence alone overshadowed the entire civilian executive. His arrival was met with frenzied public adoration. The Directory was terrified of his immense popularity. They feared the young general who commanded the absolute loyalty of a conquering army and whose presence in the capital represented a constant potential for a military coup, an internal threat far greater than any external enemy. The political dynamics within the Directory were crucial. The directors needed Napoleon's military genius to maintain the war against the remaining elements of the First Coalition, but they desperately needed to remove him from Paris. Sending Napoleon abroad on a grand, distant expedition served 2 essential political purposes. Firstly, it eliminated the immediate threat of a coup, securing the civilian government. Secondly, it satisfied Napoleon's relentless thirst for action and glory. The Directory knew Napoleon was too restless, too ambitious to be content with mere administrative work in Paris. They presented the Egyptian venture not as an exile, but as an operation of supreme national importance, a mission worthy of the Republic's greatest general.
Napoleon, for his part, was aware of the Directory's fears and the political traps of lingering in Paris without absolute power. He realized he needed to maintain his public image through continuous spectacular action, and that a spectacular distant conquest would enhance his legend more than any domestic political maneuvering. The most crucial strategic motivation behind the Egyptian campaign was the long-standing and deeply complex struggle against France's arch-nemesis, Great Britain. By 1798, Napoleon had already concluded that a direct invasion of the British Isles, the preferred method of the Directory, was a near impossibility, due to the overwhelming naval dominance of the Royal Navy. To defeat Britain, France had to strike at her immense economic power and her global network of trade and colonies. Egypt provided the perfect strategic proxy. Egypt, though nominally a province of the Ottoman Empire, was effectively ruled by the feudal military caste known as the Mamluks. It occupied a critical geographical position. Control of Egypt would grant France a staging point in the eastern Mediterranean and, crucially, threaten the long-established British trade routes to India, the jewel of the British Empire. Napoleon's strategic vision was grandiose. He aimed to seize Egypt, establish a French base there, and eventually utilize the position to march overland or sail through the Red Sea to India, where he hoped to join forces with local Indian rulers hostile to the British, such as Tipu Sultan of Mysore. The ultimate goal was to destabilize and ultimately dismantle the economic engine of British power, forcing London to sue for peace on French terms. This was a classic flanking strategy, moving around the powerful shield of the Royal Navy to strike at Britain's economic heart. Napoleon's personal ambition and profound intellectual curiosity also played a massive role, shaping the entire character of the expedition. The general was a deeply devoted student of classical history, literature, and philosophy. He was captivated by the romantic narratives of Alexander the Great, who had famously conquered Egypt and led his armies into Asia, a precedent Napoleon consciously sought to emulate. Egypt represented a stage upon which Napoleon could not only achieve military glory, but etch his name permanently into the annals of history alongside the great figures of antiquity. This was the pursuit of gloire, personal and national glory, amplified by classical ambition.
This vision of conquest and cultural legacy Napoleon brought along not just soldiers, but a massive contingent of savants, or scholars and scientists, numbering over 160 individuals. This group included mathematicians, chemists, botanists, engineers, archaeologists, and linguists. The inclusion of the savants demonstrated that the expedition was intended to be not only a military conquest, but also a massive scientific and cultural undertaking. Napoleon intended to bring the superior knowledge of the Enlightenment to the East, a blending of military force and scientific exploration that had never been seen before. Their mission was to study, analyze, and ultimately master Egypt's ancient past and modern geography, providing the foundation for a permanent French administration. The execution of the Egyptian strategy demanded absolute secrecy. The massive French invasion fleet, consisting of 13 warships, over 300 transport vessels, and carrying more than 35,000 troops, along with the crucial contingent of savants, sailed from Toulon in May 1798. To deceive the omnipresent Royal Navy, commanded by Admiral Horatio Nelson, the destination was kept a closely guarded secret, even from most of the high-ranking officers. Napoleon masterfully created and spread disinformation, suggesting the fleet was headed for an invasion of Ireland, a common French strategic distraction. The first objective was Malta. Malta, then held by the antiquated Order of St. John of Jerusalem, provided a strategically critical stopping point and watering hole in the middle of the Mediterranean. Napoleon seized the island with minimal resistance in June 1798, securing a vital naval base and confirming the initial success of the expedition's secrecy. Nelson, desperately searching the Mediterranean for the French fleet, had completely missed their passing. The French forces made a successful, though difficult, landing near Alexandria in early July 1798. Napoleon quickly secured the city, but the real test lay inland, on the road to Cairo.
The French army faced immediate, punishing challenges from the harsh desert environment, including intense heat, lack of water, and unfamiliar terrain, factors that immediately began to degrade the morale of the European troops. The dominant power in Egypt was the Mamluk military aristocracy, a formidable and legendary cavalry force known for their individual bravery and superior horsemanship, but lacking modern tactical cohesion.
The Mamluk military system was feudal, relying on individual prowess rather than disciplined formations and combined arms. Napoleon understood that the best defense against cavalry charges was the strength of infantry formations. The inevitable collision between the technologically advanced French infantry and the feudal Mamluk cavalry occurred just outside Cairo at the Battle of the Pyramids on July 21, 1798. Despite the romantic name, the pyramids were only visible on the distant horizon. This battle was a decisive tactical victory and a military demonstration of the superiority of modern discipline over individual heroism. The Mamluks charged with legendary bravery, their colorful silks and flashing scimitars presenting a terrifying spectacle. Napoleon, however, had prepared his troops meticulously for this exact confrontation. He deployed his infantry into massive hollow squares, a formation that proved impenetrable to cavalry. The front rank of the square presented a bristling hedge of bayonets, while the inner ranks delivered disciplined volleys of musket fire. The Mamluk charges simply broke upon the solid walls of the French squares, a frustrating and bloody failure. The French losses were minimal, while the Mamluks were utterly routed, shattering the myth of their invincibility and securing the immediate conquest of Cairo. Napoleon immediately began the process of establishing a French administration. He sought to portray the French not as foreign conquerors, but as liberators who respected the Islamic faith and culture, and who had come to free Egypt from the corrupt Mamluk yoke. This political maneuver was crucial. He issued proclamations in Arabic, asserting that the French were allies of the Ottoman Sultan and respectful followers of the Quranic prophets, claiming a shared purpose against the oppressive Mamluks. This attempt at cultural assimilation, however, was often shallow and ultimately unconvincing to the deeply religious populace. The initial success and relative ease of conquest masked a looming catastrophe. The strategic flaw in the entire campaign was that while Napoleon had successfully defeated the enemy on land, he had completely failed to account for the dominance on sea. The initial military triumph at the pyramids was immediately and devastatingly undermined by the catastrophic reality of British sea power.
Juan Napoleon was consolidating his hold on Cairo. The British Mediterranean fleet, under the command of the brilliant and relentless Admiral Horatio Nelson, finally located the French fleet anchored near Alexandria in Aboukir Bay. Nelson had pursued the French across the Mediterranean with furious determination, missing them at several key junctures, only to find them resting at anchor. The resulting Battle of the Nile, or the Battle of Aboukir Bay, on August 1st and 2nd, 1798, was an unmitigated disaster for the French Republic. Nelson employed a daring and unexpected maneuver, attacking the French line from both sides, pinning them against the shore, in a tactic the French fleet under Admiral Brueys was entirely unprepared for. The superior training, tactics, and sheer firepower of the Royal Navy decimated the French fleet. The French lost 11 of their 13 ships of the line, including the flagship L'Orient, which exploded spectacularly and tragically. This naval catastrophe had immediate and profound strategic consequences. The French army in Egypt was instantly cut off from France. The sea lanes were now entirely dominated by the Royal Navy, meaning no reinforcements, no fresh supplies, and no communication could reach Napoleon's army. The entire expedition transformed overnight from a grand offensive conquest into a massive stranded garrison. The British had surgically removed the lifeline of the French operation, effectively placing Napoleon and his army under a strategic siege thousands of miles from home. This unexpected turn of events forced Napoleon to completely reassess his objectives. The dream of marching to India was instantly extinguished, and the immediate goal became mere survival and the securing of the Levant. Egyptian exploration, the Egyptian campaign. Why did Napoleon go to Egypt? Part 6 of 9. The isolation caused by the naval defeat at Aboukir Bay forced Napoleon to abandon his grand strategic vision of striking British India and focus instead on securing his immediate operational position. The French presence in Egypt instantly became a profound threat to the Ottoman Empire's sovereignty. The Ottomans, nominally the rulers of Egypt, declared war on France and began mobilizing two large armies, one in Syria advancing south toward Egypt and another preparing for a sea landing at Aboukir. Napoleon knew that waiting for these armies to converge would be fatal.
In a characteristic move of strategic aggression, Napoleon decided to neutralize the threat from Syria before it could materialize. In February 1799, he launched an invasion of the Levant, Syria, and Palestine, taking 13,000 troops north into the desert. The goals were clear: preemptively destroy the First Ottoman Army, seize key coastal ports to secure his northern flank, and use the captured siege artillery to reduce the Ottoman strongholds. The initial advance was successful. French forces took El Arish and notoriously captured and executed the garrison at Jaffa, a brutal act intended to terrify the local populace, but which served only to deepen the hostility of the Ottoman resistance. The entire Syrian campaign, however, hinged on the capture of a single, small coastal fortress, Acre. Acre, though minor, was critical because it was the key to moving further inland and because its defenses were brilliantly organized by the Ottoman governor, Djezzar Pasha, and critically aided by the presence of a small British naval squadron commanded by Commodore Sir Sidney Smith. Smith was not only a naval officer but a strategic genius. He intercepted and seized the French siege artillery that Napoleon had sent by sea, turning Napoleon's own heavy guns against the French attackers. The siege of Acre was a devastating failure. The French launched 11 furious but unsuccessful assaults against the sturdy walls. The terrain was difficult, the disease was rampant, and the defenders were resolute and well supplied by the British fleet. After 2 months of costly siege warfare, Napoleon realized the futility of the effort. The loss of his siege guns, the approach of Turkish reinforcements, and the outbreak of the deadly bubonic plague among his own troops forced a difficult decision. Invasion of Egypt. Exploration, the Egyptian campaign. Why did Napoleon go to Egypt? Part 7 of 9. The failure to capture Acre marked the furthest and most definitive military failure of Napoleon's career up to that point. The walls of the fortress proved impregnable, and the siege itself exposed critical operational flaws. poor logistics for a deep desert campaign, and the sheer impossibility of fighting effectively without naval superiority. The presence of Sir Sidney Smith's British naval squadron was the ultimate decider, preventing the arrival of French reinforcements and ensuring that Acre was continuously supplied and armed, critically, with Napoleon's own captured artillery. In May 1799, Napoleon was forced to make the humiliating decision to retreat back to Egypt. The retreat across the brutal Syrian desert was an agonizing ordeal. The army was decimated not only by skirmishes with Ottoman forces, but primarily by dehydration, starvation, and the terrifying scourge of the bubonic plague. Napoleon displayed remarkable personal courage during this retreat, often seen visiting plague-ridden soldiers in their hospitals, touching them to combat the demoralizing fear that gripped the troops. This calculated show of defiance against fear was aimed at preserving the troops' morale and his own image as a fearless leader, a critical piece of psychological warfare against his own men. Upon returning to Cairo, Napoleon quickly restored order, but his strategic position remained dire. He had failed to eliminate the Ottoman threat. Soon after the retreat, the Second Ottoman Army, which had been mobilized by sea, landed at Aboukir Bay, the very site of Nelson's great naval victory. This landing forced Napoleon into a final, decisive land battle to save his entire expedition. The Battle of Aboukir, July 1799, was a stunning tactical victory for the French. Napoleon annihilated the Ottoman landing force, demonstrating his superior mastery of combined arms and maneuver against a poorly organized and positioned enemy. The battle was total. The Turkish forces were driven into the sea, where many drowned. This decisive victory restored French military prestige and gave Napoleon the final spectacular military triumph he needed to cloak the campaign's overall strategic failure. The stunning land victory at Aboukir in July 1799 gave Napoleon the final spectacular military triumph he needed to cloak the campaign's overall strategic failure. Although the French army was still isolated and stranded, the news reaching Paris focused solely on the total destruction of the Ottoman landing force, conveniently ignoring the previous naval disaster and the humiliating retreat from Acre. This provided Napoleon with the perfect political opportunity. Crucially, while in Egypt, Napoleon had received a packet of European newspapers from the British Admiral Sir Sidney Smith, the very man who had frustrated him at Acre. These newspapers revealed the true extent of the political and military crisis engulfing France. The Directory was in shambles, politically bankrupt, and French armies were suffering fresh defeats in Italy and on the Rhine against the Second Coalition. Napoleon immediately recognized the immense political vacuum and the public's desperation for a leader. He understood that his fame was peaking precisely when the Republic's fortunes were bottoming out. His decision to abandon his army and return to France was entirely self-serving and politically calculated. Napoleon secretly slipped away from his command in August 1799, leaving General Jean-Baptiste Clémaire in charge with a simple, direct order: hold Egypt. He sailed back to France on a small frigate, managing to evade the vigilant Royal Navy one last time, a testament to either luck or masterful seamanship. His arrival in France in October 1799 was a political masterstroke.
The public, starved for a hero, ignored the fact that he had left his army behind and hailed him as the savior of the Republic. He was precisely the military strongman Sieyès and the other conspirators needed to execute their planned constitutional coup. The Egyptian campaign, militarily a disaster, was politically a resounding success because it had removed Napoleon from immediate political risk in Paris and provided him with a renewed, invincible public legend, a legend that the corrupt Directory was powerless to resist. This fame was the final currency he needed to seize power. The Egyptian campaign ultimately failed to achieve its primary military goal, crippling Great Britain by striking at India. Yet its legacy proved far more profound and enduring than its operational failures. The campaign was a cultural and scientific triumph unparalleled in its scope. The 160 savants Napoleon brought with him undertook a massive systematic study of ancient and modern Egypt, revolutionizing Western understanding of the region. Their discoveries led to the publication of the monumental Description de l'Égypte, a massive scholarly work documenting everything from Egypt's natural history to its ancient monuments. Crucially, during an expansion of trenches near Fort Julien in 1799, French soldiers discovered the Rosetta Stone. This single artifact, inscribed with the same text in hieroglyphics, Demotic, and ancient Greek, provided the vital key that allowed Jean-François Champollion to finally decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, fundamentally unlocking 4 millennia of Egyptian history to the world. The scientific legacy of the expedition was immense and remains the campaign's most lasting contribution.
For the people of Egypt, the campaign was a brief, brutal period of occupation that led to the eventual rise of Muhammad Ali Pasha, who took power after the French withdrawal and modernized Egypt, turning it into a regional power. For Napoleon himself, the campaign was the final, necessary step in his ascent to absolute power. He returned with the image of an invincible general who had conquered the East, an image untainted by the complex political failures of the Directory. The fame he manufactured in the sands of Egypt provided the moral authority he needed to execute the coup of 18 Brumaire, transforming the general of the revolution into the first consul of France and setting the stage for the empire. The Egyptian campaign was not a victory of cannons and fleets, but a victory of propaganda and destiny, a crucial detour that ultimately delivered Napoleon to the throne of Europe.